All right, so 21. All right, 21's basically the same as the other ones we've done. They've just got fractions in there. So I look at A. Is A good?
Yeah.
Yep, so I don't have to do anything with it. So I'm going to take R squared minus 9R blank minus 38 blank. What goes in the blanks?
B over 2 squared.
B over 2 squared. Good. So I do negative 9 over 2. Does that simplify nicely?
No.
No, it doesn't. So I leave it as 9 over 2 squared gives me 81 over 4. I subtract 81 over 4. Right? What do I do with those last two terms? Combine them. What do I do with those front three terms? Factor them. So I'm going to start with those front three. I'm going to have the variable in parentheses squared. How do I get that second term? Yep. B over 2. So negative 9 divided by 2 gets me negative 9 over 2. That doesn't simplify nicely, so I just leave it. Then I combine those last two, and it gives me negative 233 over 4.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Again, just funky fractions. Any other major malfunctions?
Yeah. It does swear.
Okay. Hearing no other objections, I'm going to move along there. So if you'll make sure name and date are on those and turn those in. Today is the 7th? 7th? 11/7/16.
Thank you.
All right. So like I said, we were working on completing the square. That was the how. Now we're doing the why. So first off, let's start with vertex form, because that's what completing the square does. It gives us vertex form. So vertex form, the generic vertex form is A times X minus H squared plus K.
Okay.
And that should look familiar.
Will you tell me what the letters mean?
Yes. But that should look very familiar. That's the general, that's what we've been getting on completing the square. That's what your answer is written in. A number times parentheses, a variable, plus or minus a number, squared, plus or minus a number, right?
Yeah. What's the H?
I'm going to explain all of those pieces.
I feel like it's for height, but I don't know. And then K is the K is cosine.
So I'm going to start with vertex. This is vertex form. I said it, but I didn't write it. So vertex form. So to find the vertex is generally xy, right? As a coordinate.
Yeah, sure.
In vertex form, it's hk. Here's the tricky part with hk though. That there's only one trick to it at all, and you just have to remember something. It's not a solve, it's not a look for it, it's an always. You just have to remember. H, if you notice here, is negative, right? H here is positive. It's always the opposite of the sign of K, of H. Bleh, I said it backwards. It's always the opposite of the sign of H. I'm going to show you in just a second.
So X and A are just like there to say I'm here.
We're going to go over the rest of that stuff later. Right now we're just doing vertex form and we're only using H and K. I promise I'll tell you what all the rest of it is too.
Alright.
But right now we're doing H and K, and that tells us our vertex. H is going to be your X value, but you remember it's always the opposite of whatever is in that equation up there. So let's take that first one on your paper. Take that first one on your paper there. And let's go ahead and complete the square. Let's find vertex form. That's what completing the square does. So we're going to do v squared plus 10v minus 21.
I didn't say about it until I.
And I'm going to put my blanks in.
That makes me wanna
She
cry.
is why I've laughed today.
Those of you listening, why that you aren't here, this is what your class sounds like all the time. Okay, this is their notes while they're gone. Told them I'd post it on YouTube. Now,
What?
you're being recorded.
Oh my god.
Said that a couple times now.
I failed.
Yeah. Now, I put the blanks in. It's not. You signed a form. Now, with that, v squared plus 10v blank minus 21 blank equals y. What goes in the blank?
B over 2 squared.
B over 2 squared. So, B is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 5 squared is?
25.
Good. So I add 25 in the first blank. I subtract 25 in the second blank. What do I do with those last two terms?
Combine them.
Good. I combine them. What do I do with those front three terms? I factor them. So I set it up. V, parentheses squared.
Plus 5.
What goes in the
Plus 5.
B over 2.
B over 2? So 10 divided by 2 is 5. So plus 5. And then minus 46 equals y, right?
Sure.
Wait, how'd you get from 6? Oh, you just combined.
I combine those two. Now, my vertex is always going to be an ordered pair. So I look at that number right there. That's h, right? But I look at the opposite of the sign.
Negative
So it's
5.
negative 5.
So it's negative 5. And then I take the second number as is. Negative 46.
Oh, look
Oh,
at
that's
that.
good.
Wait,
And that's the vertex. That's it.
so,
Yes.
so C is Y, or C is K, pretty much?
So you do it the same.
The after we combine those, yes, that's k. Yeah, after we combine those two, that's k.
So our actual answer is negative 5, negative 46, right?
That's your vertex. It depends on what they're asking for. I can't just say it's your answer. It depends on what they're asking for. If it's wanting vertex form, that's your answer. If it's wanting vertex, that's your answer. I want both.
So, just to get the X vertex, you can just look at the thing for parentheses and change the sign.
Yes, that's it. To get, you guys hear that? Get the x of that vertex, you just do the opposite sign of what's inside the parentheses. You just look at that and change the sign.
I'm going to forget that.
No other solving. That is the part most people forget, is they forget they have to change the sign of that, and that's why we're doing a bunch of them today. We're going to start with that first part going through, and then after we do some of these, and you get a chance for that to soak in and doing some of the stuff we did Friday, go do one more easy thing that has a couple of easy notes that goes with it. And again, it's just remembering, don't remember so well. Remembering stuff and applying it. Let's just plug it in, just like all the rest of this. It's just remember it and plug it in. Okay? So I'm going to stop. We're going to start with our vertex form again. So we've got vertex form. I'm going to rewrite that. It's a times x minus h squared plus k.
Yeah, some random letters.
So a is a stretch or a shrink.
Is that spelled right? I'm pretty sure there's another T.
Boy.
A stretch or a shrink is a. Also, if a is negative, it's a flip.
Do what now? So the route back.
Yeah, instead of being, if it's positive, it's cup up. If it's negative, it's cup down.
What do you mean by stretch or shrink though?
If you-
Wider or skinnier.
I am not into it.
So is it kind of like dilation or?
Yes, it's very much like a dilation.
Okay.
We either made it a big fat parabola or made it a really skinny one. Uh-huh.
Okay.
And that's what A does. And we'll talk about how to tell whether it was a stretch or a shrink in just a second.
So,
But right now, know that A stretches or shrinks. And then if A is negative, it's also a flip. So you got two things from A. If A isn't there, we didn't do any of those things. We didn't flip it. We didn't shrink it. Okay? Now, H. If it is negative, it moved
I might wanna write this down.
right. And you remember that's kind of backwards where you would think it is because we have to change the sign of H. So it seems kind of backwards. And that's if it's positive, we moved left. So it's kind of backwards.
That's very bad. So it's backwards like the max and min thing?
Right. And it's also
Probably confusing.
because of the squared term messes up signs. And that's what it is, because that H is squared. It messes with the signs inside.
Oh,
And that's why. So that's why moving right is negative and moving left is positive. It's the same thing as if you can remember with your vertex, if you can remember that with your vertex, you can look at it and say, oh, my vertex was actually a positive number for my X value. I moved over to the right. My X was actually a negative value, so I actually moved to the left. Okay? It's backwards of the H.
Same.
And K, or shrink that just a little bit. If K is positive, it moves, any guesses? Up.
So you
And if it's
did that
negative, it
normal.
Down.
moves down.
Unlike you.
True.
So it moved up, moved down, right?
She understands my struggle though.
K on the outside, it's just like when we did vertex, we didn't change the sign. We don't change the sign when we're talking about transformations either, and that's what these are. We're trying to figure out where it moved. Okay?
I think I got this now.
So, real quick so we get an idea of what this looks like. Take your calculator, hit Y equals.
This thing says 4 tens. 10 off 10, whatever it's called. 4, 4, 4, 1, L1, I don't know.
For the first one, type in Y equals X squared. For the second one, type in 3X squared.
On the second.
Yeah, so you're going to graph both of them at the same time. Pay attention to which one graphs first.
Whoa.
I just want to go back to like square, I know such so I know how to do this. Just work on it. Oh, so we're gonna have a problem.
The X squared when you graph, I can start having this over.
Your X squared should graph first. And then what happens when you graph it? Let's do X squared first. So if we do that, we've got 0, 0. We got 1, 1. We've got 2, 4.
3, 9.
3, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Or 16.
Yeah, I'm going to start with that because that's enough to get me the points I need to see. Guys, listen up. So, when I graph, I'm going to choose a different color here after I connect those dots. Doesn't need to be perfect, I just need to be able to see what's going on here. And I'm going to choose green for this next one. So I'm going to do 3x squared.
0, 1 and 3. 2 and 12.
And I'm just going to do those two for right now. And since it's axis of symmetry over the y-axis there.
Freaking awkward.
So what happened when I multiply it by a whole number? What happened when I multiply it by a whole number? It shrunk. It got skinnier.
That is beautiful.
What do you think is going to happen if I multiply it by a fraction?
It's going to wide.
It's going to stretch. Small numbers give me big fat graphs. Big numbers give me little skinny graphs. Okay? Because if you think I'm multiplying the terms I'm putting in by 3 after I square it.
I get that.
So if I plug in 1, 1 squared is 1. 1 squared is 1. Times 3 gives me 3. So as I'm doing that, I'm getting think of it like an exponential graph. As I'm going up here, as I'm going up the graph, I'm getting bigger faster and faster because I'm multiplying by a big number. That's the reason it's going to be tall and skinny. If I multiply by a fraction, my growth is going to be smaller and smaller and smaller, which is going to make it wider.
Question though.
Yes.
Alright, yes, I know that a negative flips it, but a negative is a small number, so would it be a wide?
Think of it whole numbers and fractions. Instead of big numbers and small numbers, think of it whole numbers and
So
fractions.
when you're thinking about the stretch and shrink, forget the negative.
Right. Because it'll still do the stretch and shrink with negative numbers as well. It'll just do them upside down. Okay? So, what I want you on that paper that you've got there. So let's take number 1 that we've already done. And you had, let me go back to that. It should be a plus 1 squared. 1 squared minus should be minus 4. Is that right? Equals y?
Yeah, no.
No.
Sorry, I'm on the wrong paper.
What are you doing? No.
Sorry, I'm on your paper from yesterday.
Right.
No one knows.
So let's try v plus 5 squared minus 46. That looks more better. Now, I take that one. The first thing we had our vertex. And we said it was negative 5, negative 46, right? So let's look at my transformations. Do I have an a value other than 1 on here? No, my a value was 1, right? Was it positive or negative? Positive. So I don't have to worry about stretches, shrinks, or flips on that one. There's nothing there for me to worry about, so none of that happened. I look at my h. It's positive, so that means I moved where?
Left.
Left. It's backwards. I moved left how many?
5.
So moved left 5.
Wait, do we need to write that down?
That's one of the things you need on those because we're going to talk about where it moved. Where's the, and then we look at K to tell up and down. How far up or down did it move?
Down 46.
Down 46. So I say move left 45 and down
Left 5.
46.
You forgot about.
You said 45.
Yeah, you said 45.
Move left 5 and down 46.
Well, you said 45.
I may have. If I said it wrong, I'm fixing it now. Move left 5 down 46.
So do we put this on the picture?
Yes. Notice I did not say moved left negative 5 and moved down negative 46. That's wrong. Don't do that.
All you gotta do.
That's it.
That's it.
If there's an A, now the one's on the back.
Yeah.
So let's look at one on the back. Let me make sure I'm on the right paper this time.
Do 11. No, do 15. Do 18. 15.
You just want 15 because you haven't done it yet.
I actually have the whole paper. No, do 14, 15, 16, 17, 18.
I'm mostly picking on you.
There's like 20 on the other paper.
Mostly.
Done the whole paper. Not that.
So factor out a 9. M squared minus 20 over 9M minus 7 over 3.
I didn't say it right, but I'm talking about it. I got you. Oh, that means going to the floor. Yes.
So I do that. Let me shrink that a bit so I've got some space to work with. M squared minus, let's see, that's 10 over 9 should be 100 over 81.
Minus 108. And then 9, double parentheses, m minus 10 over 9 squared,
Good.
minus 289 over 81.
That sounds right.
Yeah, I know, because I did the paper. Yeah, I didn't do the paper. I didn't do it. And then 9, parentheses, m minus 10 over 9 squared. Minus 289 over 9. How the crap are you doing?
Yep.
Wow.
Knowledge.
Vertex
Which I don't know.
is 10 over 9 minus 289 over 9.
I like this.
For those of you listening at home, that's Lainey that's owning that problem right there.
You're still recording us, right?
Yep, they gotta know how to do this.
What'd you say my name?
Hey,
I said you were owning that problem.
taxation.
I own that
Yeah,
problem.
you own that problem.
You right.
Vertex is 10 ninths,
I'm probably not gonna look at this, right?
negative 289 over 9.
Oh, what is that?
Doesn't bother me none. I ain't telling them how to do it when they get back. Now, you hope you heard that. Now, vertex, x, y.
You're welcome, you guys.
I look at my a value.
You know, I'm not polishing this down.
My a value,
Which is 9.
which is 9. Is that a whole number or a fraction?
Whole number.
So what happens? Is that a stretch or a shrink?
Shrink.
Shrink.
So you go.
You just tell me a shrink.
So you just get shrink.
Yep. That's all I'm worried about for right now. Shrink.
Like my dream.
Wait,
Same.
how do you know? Okay, so if it's a
Whole number, it's a shrink. If A is a whole number, it's a shrink. If A is a fraction,
stretch.
it's a stretch. And 9's positive, right? So I didn't flip. Do I have any negative A's on this one? Not on this sheet. You're not going to have any flips on this one.
Dang.
So I moved left or right?
Hey, wait.
I moved right how much?
10 ninths
10 ninths.
How does that work?
and down 289 ninths. There we go.
Oh, okay, so you just add.
And
10 9.
shrink that one more time.
Or do you just write shrink?
You just write shrink. Moved right 10 ninths. And
I moved left 10 9 since it's a positive.
God. Taylor.
You change it to a positive after.
I'm done.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
This one was good.
And down
This is why you're great.
289 over 9.
289 over 9. And that's the whole thing.
I don't wanna do that.
It's not really any harder. It's just being able to pay attention to what those numbers are and move which direction. And that actually gets you guys just a titchy bit ahead on Wednesday. Which means you might actually have a little bit of free time Wednesday. Maybe. Depending.
We've got a lot of free time Tuesday, and then 4 years of slavery.
Crap.
What?
What?
Okay?
Made no sense.
It's Ian. It's okay.
Election.
Nothing's
I'm going to stop there before that degrades anymore.